Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Max Velocity weather forecast. And in today's forecast, we'll be breaking down another big weather pattern change that'll be impacting the United States for the foreseeable future, and this is called a death ridge. We'll be looking at a huge high pressure system that'll bring excessive heat to a large chunk of the country. However, this does have some indication that some fall-like temperatures are on the horizon with a big cool down in sight in October. I'll be giving you the latest breakdown on everything that you need to know in this forecast, but let's begin with what's happening across the United States today. And we'll first begin with the Midwest, and this is an area that we actually have a low pressure system that is currently centered over the Great Lakes, and this has been bringing some showers and even some storms. We had a little bit of severe weather in the St. Louis area yesterday. More severe weather is ahead this evening across parts of the Ohio Valley, with damaging winds and perhaps a little bit of large hail being the main concerns, with maybe a brief tornado. So we're looking at an area there across parts of Kentucky and Tennessee for the next few hours. Down in the southeast United States, we have a stationary frontal boundary that's in place, and with a strong El Nino comes a lot of rainfall for Florida, usually during fall and winter. We're seeing it a little bit early though. We're seeing a lot of showers and storms down there with some severe weather even. So there's been some pretty active weather down there for the last several days. Storms are continuing. They're very slowly moving to the east with a very weak upper level winds. It's going to create very weak steering, which basically means these showers and storms are not going to be moving very fast. Over in the western tier of the United States, not a whole lot of activity over here. The only spot that has some activity is in the Pacific Northwest with some showers and storms there. And then we also have a high pressure system that's beginning to fill in over the central plains, and over the next several days this will become more dominant and it'll move off to the east, becoming again our quote-unquote death ridge, which is just a strong high pressure system that we'll be looking at over the next several days. One thing I want to point out is that the weather is actually not very active in the United States right now. We have a very small quantity of warnings and watches across the country. Some red flag warnings in effect across parts of the Rocky Mountains, and then a couple of aerial flood advisories and as well as flood watches in effect across the East Coast. But other than that, it has been very quiet across the United States. But again, things are going to change over the next several days. And one way to look at those changes is looking at the jet stream, and we have a pretty interesting pattern right now. So again, we have that very weak disturbance that's centered over parts of the Midwest that's bringing that isolated severe weather this evening across parts of the Ohio Valley. Notice the stronger jet stream that's all the way located in the northwest United States that's not really impacting the greater part of the United States, and that jet stream goes all the way through Canada, and you really can't see it on your screen. So that's what we're looking at for the jet stream right now. But once we go throughout the next several days, things will change pretty rapidly. So notice as we go into Friday and Saturday, notice the jet stream. There's going to be a huge dip in the jet stream on the west coast of the United States, and notice there's also a trough located over here. It's weaker, but it's in the northeast. This is actually what we call an omega block pattern. Even though it's not really resemblant on the east coast, this is an omega block, and what this basically means is that we have a huge high pressure system in between an omega block Greek letter shape. That's what we're looking at here. Very deep trough over on the west coast of the United States. That'll ramp up shower and storm activity over there. Unfortunately though, for the central tier of the United States, so for the southern plains, the central plains, northern plains, Midwest, it's going to be quite dry as we go into the weekend. Now as we go into the late weekend and into next week, we're going to start to see that trough move a bit further off to the east. Omega block is dominating over the eastern central tier of the United States, so kind of in the Midwest Ohio Valley. Low pressure system moves off the coast. Again, that's your omega block pattern. That's the omega block shape that you're looking at. That's a Greek letter. And then once we go into next week, we're going to start to see probably some pretty big changes. So notice as Tuesday into Wednesday, that jet stream dips very far down to the south. This could actually allow for an extensive cool down for a large chunk of the not Midwest, but the central plains and northern plains, potentially the Midwest as we go later into the week. By Wednesday into Thursday, that trough moves off to the east. Notice that little bowling ball low that starts to eject over the Rocky Mountains. That could allow for severe weather over the long term, so perhaps during October 4th to 5th time frame. Again, it's very long-term forecast. Things will change, but that's a possibility as we go into that time frame. And eventually going into the following weekend, there is a chance for a very large-scale trough in the northern tier of the United States to bring a huge cool down for the fall, which is obviously something we see very often as strong cold frontal boundaries. That is a possibility once we go into potentially the late first week of October, maybe the second week of October for a large chunk of the United States. And you'll see that a bit better here on the temperature anomalies, but just keep this in mind. We are over a week and a half out from that even happening. So a lot of things will change between now and then. This might not happen. Just keep that in the back of your head. But here are the temperature anomalies for the next several days. Again, notice the extensive heat across much of the country, all the way from the southern tier of the United States back into Canada. Once we go into Sunday into Monday, notice the heat really starts to ramp up by then, we'll be talking about record-breaking temperatures across parts of the Midwest and as well as parts of southern Canada near Toronto. Eventually, as we go into Tuesday into Wednesday, that heat really moves off to the east. Still looking at some heat across much of the country. And eventually, as we go into late next week, again, things become very uncertain really past Wednesday of next week, but there will be a chance for a pretty large cool down. Notice a deepening trough. This could bring some really cold temperatures. Now, we're not talking about 20s and 30s, but we're at least talking about 50s and 60s for some areas in terms of high temperatures in the northern plains, which is a bit more accustomed for those areas during the fall. Here's the GFS model, that same exact thing. Again, notice it does show a very extensive cool down, and then a second one right after that. Again, this is just a computer model. It's too far out to tell whether this will actually happen. It's a possibility, but it's way, way, way too early to actually say that is definitely going to happen because things change a lot long term. All right, here's the future radar for the next several days. Unfortunately, we're not really looking at rain in many areas. The main areas will be in areas like Florida, where there's a stationary frontal boundary. We'll also be watching for showers and storms in the northeast from that upper level disturbance. Once we go into the late weekend into next week, we actually might start to see a little bit of rain back up in maybe the upper Midwest, but it's a little bit uncertain there. By Tuesday to Wednesday of next week, we'll probably see some more increased showers and storms from the central plains back through the Midwest. No significant severe weather events are in our near future, which is good news if you're not looking for severe weather. And again, next week, or really the following week, so by like the 7th of October, again, this is what the European model is spitting out. It actually shows some snow in the Rocky Mountains. Again, it's too far out. We really can't tell on this one yet. We'll have to see what happens over the next several days, and we'll see if this trend is still there, because this is a new trend. It's not really been on the computer models for very long, so there's a good chance that it will change as we get closer. And here's the Climate Prediction Center's forecast. They are forecasting above average temperatures, very likely at least, for a large chunk of the United States from the 3rd of October until the 7th. And again, what I just showed you a moment ago is that big cool down. It's very uncertain. It's probably not going to happen at that specific time, but it might happen sometime in the first 2 weeks of October. So there's at least something to look forward to in terms of cooler temperatures. Drier weather is expected across the eastern tier of the United States for the first week of October. Meanwhile, an increased risk of at least increased precipitation is expected for a large chunk of the central plains, southern plains, and northern plains. So basically the entire Great Plains for the first week of October as well. And the tropics are ramping up in activity once again. We do have currently ongoing Tropical Storm Philippe that'll be impacting parts of the Caribbean over the next several days. So the Lesser Antilles in the track of that, and a high area of development just off to the east of that. So we'll be watching these areas very closely over the next several days. Here's what it looks like for the next several days. So again, notice Philippe will weaken as it moves toward the Lesser Antilles. It's likely to bring rainfall, maybe an increased gusty wind field, but we're not really going to be looking at anything too crazy out of that one. The system behind it has a better chance of becoming a hurricane, but even then, it's uncertain exactly where this will go. It'll probably go northwest toward Bermuda, and from there, how intense will it get? It's very uncertain. It's really far out. It's kind of what we saw with Hurricane Lee. It was very slow moving. This will be pretty similar to that, but this one does not look like it'll get to like a Category 5 strength at this time. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to hit the like button down below and subscribe if you've not already.